Thank you very much. Y'all don't waste any time, do you? I just walked in the door, literally. But I do appreciate the chance to come out and have a conversation with you. And I do hope it will be a conversation. I get a chance to speak to a lot of groups. But as you probably just heard, I was a prosecutor before, and I've worked on the Hill before. But there are a lot of new issues out there since the last time I worked on the Hill. And there's a lot of new activities going on that sort of got momentum going while I was state's attorney and since. And I guess the biggest change, of course, has been the presidency of Donald Trump and the impact that that's had across the board. Now, for purposes of this conversation, I think there was a sort of a continued attack on the federal government. And somewhere about 30 years ago, I think Reagan kind of kicked it off with firing the PATCO workers. And somehow or another, the Republican Party decided that was a great way to go. Let's attack federal employees. And so that sort of continued to build in a number of different ways, including this recent Schedule F proposal. And so efforts to gut the federal workforce, I think, are something that we're going to have to fight hard against. Let me just give you a quick background as to why I feel that way. The first, of course, is that my father was a federal employee. So when we were living in Rocky Mount, yes, I've been a federal employee too, but when we were in Rocky Mount, North Carolina in the 60s, the state was still segregated. The schools were segregated. My mother was a school teacher. We lived across the street from Booker T. Washington High School, so you can guess what side of town we were living on. And literally the town was divided along racial lines by the railroad tracks. So when you hear the phrase, he's from the other side of the tracks, that's what it references. And so in Rocky Mount and the surrounding areas, my mother taught at the black schools. She was a librarian and worked in those schools. My father had been a brick mason like his father before him, and had gone into the Air Force, and when he came out, he finished school on the GI Bill and then got a job with something called Manpower. And for those of you who aren't old enough to remember, Manpower was one of the programs that Lyndon Johnson launched as part of the Great Society's effort, in an effort to get people employed in the federal government and beyond who hadn't had a chance to do it yet. And so my father, Rocky Mount's on the eastern side of North Carolina. He used to drive over to Raleigh and High Point, which is on the western side, heading that way. And this program was so unpopular in some circles that he bought a rifle and a .45 that he took with him in his car when he went to work. And I remember asking my mom about this. I was like 6 or 7, and she's kind of playing it down. But, it's not lost on you as a kid. And so the federal government became sort of a key piece for our family, but really for the African American community and beyond that too, for advancement into the middle class. So for my father, just as I went through, worked in the military, finished school on the GI Bill, came out to work for Manpower. They liked what he was doing there, so they moved him up to Washington, where he went to work at the Department of Labor and later worked for HUD, and bounced back and forth between the two. There you go. And so from my perspective, by the time I hit college age, my father's career had really been centered around being a federal employee. And so I can look back and see the changes that made in my life, him being in the federal government and the benefits that we got from that. Step 2 for my father, Ronald Reagan becomes the president. And my father spent a lot of work, time in his work doing, it's called contract compliance, but the idea there was for government procurement, they would try and make sure that the contracts that they gave out, where bidders would say, yeah, we're going to bring in minority businesses to participate on these contracts, that they actually did it. Guess what program got shut down when Reagan got elected? Right? And so my dad got sort of consigned to, you know how they do that. They can't fire you, but they put you at one of those desks in a room by yourself where you don't do anything all the. So he got consigned to that. And after a while he left and he went and went back to, he quote unquote retired. He stayed retired for about 2 weeks till he got on my mom's nerves. And then he went out and got employed doing, working with juveniles who were having trouble in Prince William County, which is where we moved up to. Dale City, I went to Garfield High School and other places like that. So, but look, the federal government piece is in my DNA. I mean, I sort of lived that experience. I've worked it too. You just heard some of the work I did with the federal government. I've been out of school now for about 35 years, but roughly half of my career was in federal positions. And the part that wasn't, private sector for about 12 years now, something like that, but the other part was state government. So I believe in the power of government, and I also believe that it's important to make sure that the federal government is a tool not only to make things better for the public that we serve, but for the people who work in the government to make that possible. And just one other contrast, and I'll get off the family piece. My oldest daughter came out of school, and after she graduated from college, decided she wanted to go get a degree overseas. So she went to Paris. She's fluent in French. And she stayed. She's lived overseas for about 13 years now. And what she's done is that she's worked in a series of countries, some in Europe, some in Africa. Most of them struggling. Her focus is food security. She's in Poland now, helping Ukrainian refugees through that scary struggle that's going on over there. But one of the things I found out when I go visit her was you get a chance to sort of contrast governments in other countries with the government we've got here. And I know our Republican friends say, you know, what a terrible job the federal government is. If you want something screwed up, have the federal government do it. But let me tell you something. When you go see how governments work in other countries, and how bad it can be. We'll set graft and corruption to the side for the moment. But just the ability to do a good job. I was at the Department of Justice for 4 years. And it may be the best law firm in the world. It really may be. And the quality of lawyers that they're able to attract, in parts due, yeah, they pay decent money. Yes, they do. But there's a sense of pride and I think enjoyment for having the ability to work at a place where the mission is to make a difference for the public like that. People, we call them lifers. You know, people who came in as prosecutors at the Department of Justice and have stayed for their whole career. And I'm at an age where I've got friends who are retiring now out of the Department of Justice, off of Capitol Hill. I'm a glutton for punishment, so I'm continuing to go find more work to do. But I think there's, you know, we really should take into account and remember what a phenomenal, institution the federal government is of the United States. It's clear to me that we all hit the lottery when we were born in the United States of America. As I mentioned, we started in a segregated time, and you know, there's a lot of promises here about America that haven't been met, that we're still struggling to achieve. But man, this is a phenomenal country. And when I go visit my daughter overseas, you know, everybody I run into, she had one stint in Paris where I went to visit her. And I was talking to people there, and I was like, wow, this is a beautiful city. It must be fun to live. And she said, all of us are trying, we're all trying to get to the United States. Yeah. That's the place to be. Yeah. And when you think about it, and I know we got the immigration issue on the border. I'm getting off topic. I promise I'll come back in just a second. But the reason people walk from Venezuela, think about that. Think about that. Man, if I had to walk to the Target over across the street, my feet would be hurting, right? What does it take for people to put everything down in the place that they've grown up and spent their entire lives, and then do anything they can to get to this country? You know, think about it. I came across some of that scenario when I was a prosecutor, because we have gangs, sometimes who are rooted in other countries. And, you know, MS-13 is a huge problem, although it grew out of the United States and went to El Salvador, actually, but that's a subject for another conversation. But when you have people coming here and they're like, I came here because I had to get my kids away from them, you know, my kids' lives were at risk. For males, they make them join. For women, they call it sexing them in, but they're gang rapes, basically. And they're like, look, I figured the only chance we had is if we could get to the United States. So I'll stop waving the flag, but I mean, I really do think that this is a fantastic place to be. There's a reason people fight so hard and put their lives at risk to get here. And one of the reasons it's such a great place to be is because of our federal government and the outstanding job that it does on behalf of the public. So let me stop there and give everybody a chance to, well, there's questions and things I'm supposed to ask, and I know I've got a time limit till 2.
We're letting you go a little bit early because you have plenty of time.
Okay, all right. Yeah, apparently the second, my opponent's not showing up, so I guess we've got a little extra time. Okay.
Yeah, we're good.
But it's on you, sir. We can start with the question if you want us to do that. And give you time in the back end of it.
However y'all want to do it.
Why don't we start with the questions, because
Okay.
we want to make sure we get an opportunity to do that.
Okay.
I'm Dr. Gabriella Blakes, and I'm the NARFE Maryland Executive Associate to the President, and I'll be posing questions to you.
Fair enough.
Just hearing your background and some of the research that I've done on you, it's just, you're in the right place today to be able to answer our questions. And so we're looking forward to hear your answers and how you will support NARFE and active and retired employees.
Sure.
So the first question is, how will you support the hard work of federal employees and retirees and help to maintain their earned benefits?
Great question during these times, and I guess part of this will hinge, unfortunately, on how things play out next month in the midterm elections. But I think it's important to not only protect and preserve the current benefits that are there, but I think we need to try and find ways to expand the benefits. So just a couple of quick thoughts on that front. Obviously, the civil service protection, I think, is critical. For those of you who, well, I know all of you thought it was important, but for people who didn't think civil service protection was important, think back to the way things played out when they were challenging the election, the stop the steal stuff that the Trump campaign was pushing forward. And so some of the key players in those scenarios, like Raffensperger in Georgia, state employee, had no protections, right? Basically, he was an elected official, but he stood up and did the right thing. He's a Republican. He stood up against Trump and said, I can't put in a fake set of electors. I can't say that the election was stolen. I can't say that it was fraud that's going to make it. I'm not going to do that stuff. But he didn't really have any protections that would insulate him from repercussions for that. Federal employees do. Now, it's not perfect. I just told you the story about my dad a minute ago. But those are the kinds of protections that we need to make sure are preserved. And that's the stuff that President Trump was talking about eroding, especially with the Schedule F piece. So I think we need to make sure we expand those kinds of protections and benefits. And there's financial benefits to the retirement piece. Their savings plan has been the best investment I've made in my life. I'm sorry that I missed the pension system. I didn't miss it by much, but that's even better. Like I said, I've got friends who are retiring because the pension benefits were better. I think we need to try and find a way to strengthen those benefits so we can bring people in for two reasons. One, it's a great way to attract and retain talent in the federal government. The second is, as the economy changes and these, the new expenses grow, especially in the healthcare sector, people need additional benefits just to meet the challenges that they're facing in retirement. Some of the medical benefits, for example, the healthcare piece, it's really astronomical. So I think we have to try and find ways to protect those. I want to do this broadly, not just for federal employees, but for people across the board. But I think it's important to make sure we do that for federal employees too.
Okay, all right. What will you do to improve the financing and quality of care of long-term care insurance?
Great question. I said I was going to stop talking about my family, but my father, actually, who we just talked about, after he retired, started suffering from Alzheimer's. And, yes. I mean, there's nothing more heartbreaking than to watch that. But what that meant was a couple of things. One is the personal benefits that, he didn't qualify with some of the government programs, so that route wasn't available. We didn't figure out, my parents didn't tell me that he was struggling until I kept coming to visit my parents, who they live in Dale City, Virginia. We're here in Prince George's County. I'm noticing, Mom's got the blanket on the couch, and I'm a couple times in a row, I'm like, what's going on, Mom? Well, it turns out she was sleeping on the couch to keep him from sneaking out in the night, because he wouldn't remember what was going on. And so he would get up and he'd look around, and the home that he remembered was Rocky Mount, not Dale City. And so he'd get up and he'd start taking off to try and get back home. Well, obviously this wasn't tenable. That wasn't going to work forever. My mom she actually still sleeps on the couch, it's just one of those, for caregivers, one of those.
Hang in there.
Just breathe.
Take a breath.
Breathe with us, breathe. Breathe with us, breathe.
You understand.
Okay, sorry.
It's okay.
So we were fortunate because my brother and I are attorneys who've worked in the private sector, and so we were able to just provide the care that he needed, even though he didn't qualify for that Medicare, without giving everything away. But there's a huge section in the middle class where you don't qualify for Medicaid, and you don't necessarily have enough money to put up. It's like $5,000 a month, or depending on where it is, could be up to $10,000 a month. And so it's important to give people who've served the country the ability to, retire with dignity and to live out their lives. They've made a commitment to us as a nation, and we should be sure that we respect that. So I want to try and work to expand those benefits for federal employees.
Well, thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Okay. So we'll move on to the next question. Do you support the repeal of the windfall elimination pension, government pension offset?
Hello.
I'll repeat that again, please, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Do you support the repeal of the windfall elimination provision, government pension offset, or government pension offset?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I get why they put those things in place, but I think it's one of those unintended consequences. So, there's sort of reduced benefits for people who've earned them because they've got another revenue stream that they've also earned. And so instead of allowing them to earn and reap the benefits of both revenue streams, or sometimes more than one, they sort of do a trade-off, and I just don't think it's fair. And I think it's a disincentive to people to try and do right by their families for the scenarios that we were just talking about. That's one version, but there's 1,000 different versions that families can face, and these types of trade-offs are. If you've earned the benefits, you ought to be able to get them. That's my view, and so we should find ways to protect them.
Will you consider using the consumer price index for the elderly instead of the consumer price index for urban wage earners and clerical workers to calculate the cost of living adjustment for federal employees and retirees?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important for us to make sure that the cost of living, which is, well, let's think of it this way. So now that they've jacked up the interest rates, they're going to continue to jack them up, and we may be heading for an inflation stagflation scenario. I think we need to really make sure that we take the steps to give people the maximum opportunity to survive, based on the change in the economy. So I think we want to try and maximize ways to track things so they benefit from the chance to adjust for inflation moving forward as much as possible. So yes.
Okay, can you kind of elaborate a little bit, just a little bit on that, just a little bit?
For the cost of living adjustment?
Yes, please, yes.
For the elderly.
For the elderly,
The elderly.
yes.
Using that scale.
Well, I do think that's a good way to go, yes.
Okay, I'll give
I
it,
do.
okay. All right. Will you support legislation to ensure that federal employees maintain their civil service protection? I think you touched a little bit on that. In other words, you touched a lot on this one. No Schedule F, which was promoted under the previous administration. You kind of touched on that.
A little bit. I mean, I think the Schedule F is an attack on the federal government and federal employees in particular, and there's an effort to sort of undermine the federal workforce. To my surprise, they've done this with respect to the military and the investigative arms as well. So, for example, the FBI. I mean, the Republican Party's attacks on the FBI are shocking to me. Look, FBI is not a perfect organization, no question about it. I'm a criminal defense lawyer now. I go up against them all the time, and we can all think back on historically the mistakes that they made under Hoover and others. But the stuff that they've been accused of with respect to, the investigations in Trump and now the documents in Mar-a-Lago and all of that, those are outrageous allegations that are aimed at undermining the FBI and other federal investigators. The military piece, when they voted against initially, they had that thing for the open burning, right? So the military, so for those of you that don't know, when they would burn, they had the burn pits and they would burn toxic materials. And so, surprise, surprise, we had, servicemen and women get sick based on that. There was a vote maybe a month ago, I think, to give them benefits to address that. The Republican Party initially opposed it and voted it down. You had to have the military organizations get on the phone, get on the bullhorns and turn that vote around. Otherwise, they wouldn't have gotten the benefits to help them address their illnesses there. So I just think that we have to make sure that we protect. Schedule F is, one variation of that. But we've got to fight all of this stuff across the board to make sure we're protecting the people who are doing the work that we need to have done to keep this country great and moving in the right direction.
Okay. So this is the last question, Mr. Ivey, and then we're going to open it up and let you, give us a little bit more about what your platform will be and what you'll do if you are elected. Will you support providing federal employees with pay increase in line with private sector? You've heard that the federal government has always been behind more than 23% from the private sector. So do you support providing federal employees an increase in their pay? And how would you do that? What would you do to try to have an increase for the federal sector?
Yeah, the answer is yes. I do think it's important to try and make sure we keep the raises going up. And I'm not there's a lot of folks who think that the big gap is a good thing to have. They're trying to force government employees to leave and go to the private sector. Here's the problem, and depending on the scenario, what you're doing is you're trading expertise for people who represent the public and sending it to the private sector. So I'll give you a DOJ example, Department of Justice. So you cap out at, $150,000, $170,000 as a lawyer at the Department of Justice, which is a good salary, but you can then go to a law firm and make $500,000, $1 million or more. And so, okay, we're not going to keep pace with that, but we don't want to give that talent and training and experience away. Let's hang on to it as long as we can, because those are the people who are going up against, when we were fighting against corporations or whatever in court, it's these guys against those guys. And so we want to make sure that our team is just as experienced as anybody else's. Just quick analogy, I don't know what happened with the Commanders yesterday. It seems to be an ongoing problem. But, It'd be like if one football team could pay its players like 10 times more than another football team. That they might look like the Commanders did yesterday, I guess. But you want it even Steven as much as possible, because that means you're going to have the closer the money is from a balance standpoint, the more competitive you're going to be on key positions like that. And we've already paid to train them. Same thing with the military. Like take pilots, for example. A lot of times the private sector, they just wait for these guys to get to a period of training and experience, and then you hire them away from the Air Force or the Navy or whatever, instead of us keeping them getting the benefit from it. So we put in the investment, we should continue to reap the benefit.
Okay, thank you. And we're going to let you speak, but I want to just say a little bit to you before you get started. Over 6.5 million Americans are living with Alzheimer's and dementia today. So your emotions, you almost made, it was hard for me to read after you went there, because my family went through that too. But over 6.5 million people are living with it today, so you're not alone. So I understand your emotions, and I'm sure most people in the room understand your emotions as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, as a matter of fact, it's a good thing. So at this point, we're going to open it up and let you just talk to us, so you can talk freely and tell us some more of what you want to do and what your platform is really all about. Thank you.
Thank you. So it's just stays raw, it does. But with respect to the other things we'd like to do, obviously a big piece that'll be a sort of a pivotal aspect of it is whether we maintain control of the House or not. So if we maintain the House and stay in the majority, obviously the ability to move legislation forward is going to be more significant. If we lose the majority, I think we end up playing defense. I think I think that's right. And so what you'll probably end up with is, well, I'll say it like this. So when I went to the Senate back in the 90s, I went and it was the Senate Banking Committee. And so I was working for Chairman Regal, and we were doing work on things like mortgages, trying to make more mortgages available, GSEs, Fannie and Freddie, and what are they doing? How can we make mortgage rates stay low as possible? All those kinds of things that we were working on, homeowners insurance and the like. When the Republicans won, and this was the Gingrich revolution year, so that was the contract with America, contract on America, however you want to phrase it, but we lost the House and the Senate at the same time. And so the Senate Banking Committee became the Senate Whitewater Committee. And so all we did for the next 2 years were investigations about the Clintons. Did Hillary have her billing records in the east wing of the bedroom and all, just stuff like that. So since financial services were an important issue for the United States during that time period, nothing got done for that 2-year period. And so just fast forward ahead to where we are now, I assume they'll do the same thing. I assume we'll be Hunter Biden and they might go back to Benghazi, who knows? All of that same stuff, though, I think they'll be focusing on those kinds of issues as opposed to trying to move legislation through. Like, we've actually done a pretty good job of doing that in the past 2 years. We got off to a slow start in some ways, but a lot of the legislation that's come through recently, I think, has been really impressive and impactful. Maybe the most important, cluster of legislation since the Great Societies program. So I'm hoping that we can maintain a majority. We can continue to build out on some of these issues. Healthcare needs to be expanded across the board. We still have, I think it's like 25 million plus people who are not insured in the United States. We need to try and find ways to cover that. The options for doing it are already out there. There are proposals on the table ready to go. We just have to find a way to get them done and pass through. The infrastructure bill, I think, is a huge step in the right direction. There were also some inclusions about the environmental piece, trying to make things better there. And I know we're in an ongoing fight about, whether climate change is causing some of these things. And in fact, we've got Republicans who say there is no climate change, but I mean, man, I'm just, what's it going to take? If you saw what my mother-in-law and brother-in-law based in Orlando, Florida, I got a cousin down there too. And so every year it continues to get worse. They have hurricane shutters, they call them, which we may be having to get up here pretty soon too, the way things are going. But they're pieces of plywood. And so they've got a drill ritual where they just pull them out of the garage, and they know how to nail them up and everything. Everybody in the neighborhood does, to cover the windows. You know, we're heading that way. I remember that, you know, the 100-year floods felt like when I was a kid came every 100 years. Now it's like once a year or something crazy. In fact, now it's almost once a month. If you look internationally, like the floods in Pakistan, along with the ones we just had in Florida and the like, I mean, it's incredible. So I'm hoping that we can find ways to deal with those issues in an expanded way. I thought we got off to a good start with the bill that just passed. But we've got more to do on that front. And voting rights protection, protecting the democracy, you know, all the issues I sort of briefly alluded to a moment ago. This is a pivotal time for the country, I think, from the standpoint of protecting the democracy that we have. And I'm worried that if we don't do well in these elections coming up, we're going to lose further ground, and it could be even worse than that. So we'll see. But those would be my immediate sets of priorities. The local pieces, getting the FBI headquarters to come to Prince George's County, I'd really like to get that done. You know, pushing hard. We had a call yesterday about it, so we want to make sure we can do the build out on that front. NASA. You know, I look at Prince George's County. You've got NASA, the Agricultural Resource Center at the University of Maryland. And I think we've got our own research triangle here that we really ought to be building out on, because there's a level of expertise that's really unparalleled in the region in some ways, and we need to make sure we do everything we can to build on that. Then just up the road, you got NSA, you know, so the cybersecurity piece, which is really taking off. We need to continue to be leaders in that front. They got programs at the University of Maryland they're building on with that. If we really do this right, I think we can continue to attract, you know, the engineering and scientific talent that most jurisdictions are just dying to have. But there's no reason we can't have more of it here if we focus on building it out, making sure we attract and retain that kind of those businesses and the level of expertise that we've got there. So I think that's a big piece too. And finally, crime, criminal justice. When I became state's attorney in 2002, well, let me go back. So when I first became a federal prosecutor downtown in Washington, that was 1990. In 1990, for those of you who've been around long enough, that was the height of the crack wars. That was DC as Dodge City. That was 450 to 500 murders a year, roughly. In Prince George's County, we didn't have that many, but we had a pace of our own, 150 to 200. So, you know, and you link us up with Baltimore, you're talking 1,000+ murders a year. I come into office, my first year in office, we have 172 homicides when I get there. And so we want to say, okay, well, two things. One is we got 172 homicides, but we've also got 2.2 million people in jail. So the disconnect seems to be that we're trying to jail our way out of these problems, but it's not working. Are there different ways that we could approach this? And so one of the things we thought was, well, instead of waiting until the body hits the ground, why don't we see if we can get ahead of the curve and reach out and find the kids who are causing these trouble? Because by and large, they are kids. They're young men, late teens, early 20s. I know 21-year-old isn't a kid, but they kind of feels like it to me. My youngest child's 20. I've got 6 kids. Youngest one's 22. So I know how, you know, they're still maturing, basically. What are the things that we can do to try and get out in front of this and get them back on the right track? So we rolled out, with no funds, intervention and prevention programs. We got other people to fund them. We did second grade reading program. We did a series of things to try and get into the community and reach out to people before they got in too much trouble, including reaching out to gangs and including going into the prisons and working on reentry programs, which really weren't kind of happening yet back then. But that was the faith community. We had pastors and ministers that were going into the jails. I said, well, you know, let me see if I can help out, because, you know, if 99% of the people that go into jail are coming out, let's see if we can do what we can to help them get on track. So we did all of those kinds of things. A quick funny story on the reentry. I reached out to one of the pastors who was going to the jails to meet with folks. And he said, well, I like what you got in mind and we could use your help. Why don't I introduce you to a group of guys who just got out? I said, sure. And it was, you've heard of storefront churches, in the little shop. This was on the back side of the mall. So this is a store back church, I guess. So you had to go back where the dumpsters were and everything and go. And so I go into the room. There's like 100 guys in there. And the pastor goes, this is Glenn Ivey, our state's attorney. Well, I should have thought of this, but a room full of guys who just got out of jail, the last guy they want to see is the state's attorney, the guy who put him in, the office that put him in. And so the pastor had to go, all right, hold up. Let me remind you, you're in the house of the Lord. But hear this brother out. Give him a chance. And so we talked about what I was asking them to do. And here's the pitch I made to him. I said, look, you've been in jail. You're coming out. We set up this program to try and help you guys find jobs and get training and everything and have a chance to go, sir, how are you? But if you come out and screw this up, if one of you all comes out and shoots somebody or does something horrific, that'll have a couple of impacts. One, you'll kill my career, right? I'll just be done. I won't be able, people built, you saw Willie Horton commercials, I'll be like living that. But secondly, and more importantly to you, the guys that you know, that you care about, who are in the pipeline behind you, you'll shut down the pipeline. So don't steal their chance to come out here and turn their lives around. Make sure that you come out, make the most of this opportunity. If you need help, we'll try and put things in place for you. But don't screw it up for the other guys. And not only did that seem to work, this is 20 years ago, so I guess my career didn't get killed by anybody doing something bad. But more importantly, the pipeline continued. People would come out and get jobs. We tried to do this thing where we would we'd have the media come out to the jobs that were employing them, but we couldn't get the employers to go on TV, right? And I said, well, why not? Most people are dying a chance to get the data boy. And they said, well, we're worried that it'll bother our customers and coworkers. But let me tell you, Mr. Ivey, the guys that we get out who come out from the jail and come to work for us are the most loyal employees that I've ever had. And the reason is because we're the only ones that would give them a chance. And so we were there doing that. That program built out. As far as I know, it's still running. Crime dropped by 40% across the board. I got to give up my turn. All right. But anyway, so that's, continuing that effort. We did it with no government funds, no taxpayer dollars. Working with the faith community and others in the community could make a difference. So those are the kinds of things we did then. I hope to have a chance to do them again in the near future.
Don't need it.
And I thank you for your time. I really do.
Mr. Ivey?